She put on lingerie just to tell me she'd never touch me again. Not tonight. Not ever. That's how she ended our marriage without leaving the house. But here's the thing about trying to destroy a man's dignity. Sometimes you accidentally teach him what he's really worth. Let me take you back to that Friday evening when everything changed. I walked through our front door that Friday evening, feeling something I hadn't felt in months: hope. Jessica had texted me during lunch suggesting we have wine with dinner and reconnect over the weekend. The evening went perfectly. We shared a bottle of wine, talked about weekend plans, even laughed together at something on Netflix. When she suggested we head upstairs early, my heart actually quickened. In our bedroom, I watched Jessica change into the black silk negligee I'd bought her for our anniversary, something she hadn't worn in 6 months. When she climbed into bed beside me, I thought we were finally finding our way back to each other. I reached for her, my hand gently caressing her shoulder, the way that used to make her melt into me. She was warm, soft, familiar. For a moment, everything felt right again. Then she went completely rigid. "Don't," she said sharply, pulling away like I'd burned her. "I'm not in the mood." The rejection stung, but I'd heard those words before. "Okay," I said softly. "Maybe tomorrow morning?" That's when she turned to face me, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Not anger, not frustration, cold, calculated certainty. "Blake, I need you to understand something. Not tomorrow morning, not next weekend, not ever again." The words hit me like ice water. "What are you saying?" She said it like she was changing dinner plans, not the foundation of our marriage. "I'm saying I'm done with that part of our relationship. Physical intimacy. I'm not interested anymore. I've been thinking about this for months. You can accept it or leave. That's your choice." I sat up in bed, staring at this woman I'd been married to for 8 years, wearing lingerie she'd put on specifically to deliver this devastating news. "You planned this," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "The dinner, the wine, getting dressed up, you planned to hurt me." She shrugged, already turning away to remove the negligee she'd never intended to let me touch. "I wanted to be clear about where we stand. I'm comfortable with our life together, the house, our social circle, the financial stability, but I'm no longer interested in physical intimacy." This seemed like the most direct way to communicate that. But she wasn't finished. "Is there someone else?" I asked, immediately regretting the cliché question. She actually laughed, a cold sound that made my stomach turn. "No, there isn't. I'm not interested in anyone that way anymore. This isn't about you specifically. I've just moved past that phase of my life. That hurt worse than an affair would have. At least then I could have fought for her. How do you compete against indifference? How do you fight someone who simply doesn't want you anymore?" The following days existed in a strange limbo. We continued our routine: breakfast together, work, dinner, television, all while this invisible wall had been erected between us. Jessica acted like nothing had changed, like her declaration was perfectly normal. I tried bringing up counseling. "We don't need therapy," she said dismissively. "There's nothing wrong with me. I'm not going to be pressured into physical intimacy I don't want." She was right about not being pressured, but her complete unwillingness to even discuss what had changed left me feeling like I was living with a stranger. At night, lying on my side of what had become a purely functional bed, I stared at the ceiling, trying to understand how I'd missed the gradual erosion of our connection. One thing became increasingly clear. I was now in a marriage where I was neither wanted nor needed in any meaningful way. I was simply convenient, a contributor to bills, a social partner for couple-oriented gatherings, a housemate who helped maintain our outward image of marital success. 3 weeks after her declaration, I found myself sitting in my car outside our house, unable to summon the energy to go inside. That's when I realized something that would change everything. For the first time in 8 years, I wasn't rushing home to seek her approval or attention. Instead, I found myself analyzing the situation like a business problem. What was my return on investment in this relationship? What was I investing versus what I was receiving? The math was brutally clear. That's when I decided if she was done with me, I'd be done needing her. As I finally walked through our front door, a plan was already forming in my mind. Not a plan for revenge or dramatic confrontation, but something more strategic. a complete redirection of my life's energy. The next morning, I woke up at 5:30 a.m. for the first time in years. While Jessica slept soundly, completely unaware of the shift happening beside her, I sat in our kitchen with black coffee and a notebook. I made a list. Everything I'd neglected while trying to be the perfect husband to someone who'd stopped appreciating the effort. My health, my hobbies, my friendships, my professional development, my sense of self-worth. The man staring back at me from the bathroom mirror was soft, not just physically, mentally. Somewhere along the way, I'd become someone who sought validation from a woman who'd decided I wasn't worth validating. That version of me needed to disappear. I started with small changes. 20 minutes of reading, instead of immediately checking my phone. Philosophy books, psychology texts, business strategy guides. I was feeding my mind with ideas that had nothing to do with winning Jessica back. Everything to do with understanding myself. By week 2, I'd added a basic exercise routine. Nothing dramatic. Push-ups, sit-ups, a short run through our neighborhood. The physical movement helped clear my head of the constant thoughts about my failing marriage. Jessica noticed my early mornings. "You're up early," she commented on the third day, finding me reading Marcus Aurelius at the kitchen table. "Just making some changes," I replied, not offering further explanation. She didn't ask for one. Classic Jessica. Now that I was no longer orbiting around her, seeking her attention, I'd become background noise in her carefully constructed new reality. By month 2, the changes were subtle but real. My posture had improved. My clothes fit better. More importantly, my mindset was shifting from reactive to strategic. I wasn't transforming to win Jessica back. I was transforming because I'd realized how much I'd diminished myself trying to maintain a relationship with someone who didn't value what I brought to her life. I rejoined the gym I'd abandoned years ago when Jessica complained it took time away from us. Now I understood that us had always meant her. My presence was only valued when it served her purposes. The gym became my sanctuary. Not because I was trying to become some fitness model, but because it was a place where effort translated directly into results. Unlike my marriage, where years of effort had earned me nothing but dismissal. I also started exploring photography again, something I'd loved in college but abandoned when Jessica called it impractical. Every weekend I drove to different locations around our state, capturing landscapes and wildlife. These solo excursions became a form of meditation. Time when I could think clearly without the toxic atmosphere of our home. But what happened next would shift everything into overdrive. 3 months into my redirection, I made a decision that would change everything. I stopped trying to engage Jessica in meaningful conversation. For years, I'd asked about her day, her feelings, her thoughts, hoping to bridge the growing gap between us. Now I realized I'd been trying to water a plant that had decided it didn't want to grow. Instead, I focused on building connections that had nothing to do with my identity as Jessica's husband. I reconnected with old friends I'd neglected, joined a photography group that met monthly, started taking online courses in areas that genuinely interested me. At work, my performance improved dramatically. When you're no longer emotionally drained from trying to fix an unfixable situation at home, you have energy for professional excellence. My boss noticed. "Blake, whatever you're doing differently, keep it up," he said after I successfully completed a project ahead of schedule. "You seem more focused lately." The compliment meant more than it should have. After months of feeling unwanted at home, professional recognition filled some of the void. Jessica began asking questions about my new routine. "Where are you going this weekend?" she'd ask as I prepared my camera equipment. "Photography," I'd reply simply. "Since when are you into photography?" "I've always been into it. I just haven't had the time to pursue it until now." Her expression suggested she wanted to probe deeper. But she couldn't quite figure out how to show interest in my life after so deliberately stepping back from it. The truth was, I was becoming someone she didn't recognize, and the man she'd rejected was about to become someone she couldn't ignore. 6 months into my redirection, I had what could only be described as a breakthrough moment. I was hiking alone, photographing a sunrise over the Blue Ridge Mountains, when I realized something profound. I hadn't thought about Jessica's rejection in over an hour. For the first time since her declaration, I was completely present in my own life. Rather than mentally rehearsing conversations we'd never have or imagining scenarios where she'd realize her mistake. That's when I understood my transformation wasn't about becoming someone she'd want again. It was about becoming someone who didn't need her validation to feel worthy. I started reading books about evolutionary psychology, relationship dynamics, masculine identity, not to understand Jessica better, but to understand myself. Why had I allowed someone else's opinion of me to determine my self-worth? Why had I spent years trying to earn love from someone who'd already decided I wasn't worth loving? The answers weren't flattering. I'd been operating from a place of scarcity, believing that Jessica was the best I could do, that losing her meant losing my chance at happiness. I'd been a man who reacted rather than acted, who sought approval rather than commanding respect. But knowledge without action is worthless. So I began implementing what I was learning. Instead of coming home and immediately seeking interaction with Jessica, I'd spend time in my home office, working on freelance photography projects or reading. Instead of trying to plan activities for us, I made plans that fulfilled me, whether she participated or not. The change in our dynamic was subtle but significant. Jessica was no longer the center of my universe, and she noticed. 8 months into my redirection, something unexpected happened. A colleague at work mentioned that his brother-in-law needed someone to photograph a corporate event. The pay was modest, $300 for a few hours of work. But it represented something more important, validation that my hobby had commercial value. The event went well. So well that the client asked for my business card and referred me to 2 other companies. Within 6 weeks, I was booking 1 or 2 corporate photography gigs per month, earning an extra $1,000 to $1,500 on top of my regular salary. I used this money strategically. Part went into a separate investment account. Part funded better camera equipment. Part paid for additional online courses in business development and marketing. Jessica noticed the new equipment. "You spent how much on a camera?" she asked when I unpacked my new lens. "It's a business investment," I replied. "The photography work is generating income now." Her reaction was telling. Instead of pride or support, I saw something that looked almost like resentment. Her husband was developing skills and interests that had nothing to do with their marriage, and she didn't know how to process that. Meanwhile, my confidence was building in ways that had nothing to do with her approval. Clients were happy with my work. My photography group had elected me to organize their next exhibition. I was becoming a man who created value in the world, rather than someone who simply consumed it through a dead marriage. But I was about to discover something that would change everything. 10 months into my transformation, my boss called me into his office for our annual review. I expected the usual performance discussion. What I got was a promotion offer. "Blake, your work this year has been exceptional," he said, sliding a document across his desk. "We're creating a new senior analyst position. You're our first choice. 25% salary increase, plus profit sharing." 25% wasn't life-changing money, but it represented recognition that my professional value was increasing along with my personal development. When I mentioned the promotion to Jessica over dinner, her reaction was complicated. "That's great," she said, then hesitated. "Will that mean longer hours?" "Possibly," I replied. "Why do you ask? We hardly spend time together as it is." The irony was stunning. "Jessica, you made it clear months ago that you weren't interested in the kind of time married couples typically spend together. Now you're concerned about us spending less time together?" She had no response to that logic. That weekend, instead of celebrating my promotion with Jessica, I drove to Asheville. Spent 2 days photographing the fall foliage. The pictures from that trip became some of my best work. Several sold as prints through my growing online portfolio. I was building a life that didn't depend on Jessica's participation or approval, and it was more fulfilling than anything we'd shared in years. But what I discovered next would blow everything wide open. 12 months after Jessica's declaration, my photography group organized its annual exhibition at a local gallery. I contributed 6 landscape photographs, each representing a different season and location I'd discovered during my year of redirection. The opening night drew a good crowd, local artists, photography enthusiasts, people who simply appreciated visual art. I found myself in conversations with successful, creative people who valued passion and dedication. One woman, an architect named Natasha, spent considerable time studying my work. "These have incredible depth," she told me. "You can feel the solitude in them, but it's not lonely solitude, it's purposeful." Her observation was more accurate than she knew. The solitude captured in those images reflected my journey toward self-sufficiency and inner peace. We talked for over an hour about art, creativity, the importance of pursuing excellence for its own sake. Natasha was intelligent, accomplished, genuinely interested in my thoughts and perspectives. The conversation felt natural and energizing in a way that interactions with Jessica hadn't for years. When I mentioned the exhibition to Jessica the next day, she seemed surprised. "I didn't know you were in an art show. I mentioned it last week," I said, though I realized I'd stopped expecting her to listen to details about my life. "How did it go?" "Well, I sold 3 pieces and got several inquiries about commissioned work." Her expression was difficult to read. Pride, confusion, resentment. I'd become successful at something she'd never been part of, and she didn't know how to respond. That evening, as I updated my photography portfolio and responded to client emails, I reflected on how much had changed. A year ago, I would have desperately wanted Jessica's approval and support for my achievements. Now, her reaction was simply irrelevant to my sense of accomplishment. But what happened next would force Jessica to confront a reality she hadn't expected, and there was approval and support for my achievements. Now, her reaction was simply irrelevant to my sense of accomplishment. 15 months into my redirection, my combined income from my day job, photography business, and investment portfolio had increased by 40%. More importantly, I developed multiple income streams that weren't dependent on any single source. I opened a separate savings account and began building what I privately called my Freedom Fund. Money that would give me options if I ever decided to make major life changes. Jessica noticed my new financial habits. "You're being secretive about money," she accused one evening. "I'm being strategic about money." I corrected. "I'm building security and independence." "Independence from what?" I looked at her directly. "Independence from having to accept situations that don't serve my best interests." The message was clear, even if I didn't spell it out explicitly. I was becoming a man who had choices, who wasn't trapped by financial dependence or fear of being alone. This shift in my economic position changed our entire dynamic. Jessica had grown comfortable with the idea that I needed our marriage more than she did. Now, for the first time, she was seeing evidence that I might have options she hadn't considered. But the real turning point was still coming. 18 months after Jessica's declaration, my social circle had completely transformed. Through photography, business networking, and rekindled friendships, I was spending time with people who were actively pursuing their goals rather than settling for mediocrity. My photographer friend Marcus invited me to join a group that met monthly to discuss business, investments, and personal development. These weren't men who complained about their problems, they were men who solved them. "You've changed dramatically since I first met you," Marcus observed one evening after our group meeting. "You used to seem constrained somehow. Now you have this quiet confidence that commands respect." His comment made me realize how much my external presence had shifted along with my internal transformation. I was no longer someone who sought approval or validation from others. I was someone who created value and expected to be treated accordingly. Jessica began commenting on my social activities. "You're never home anymore," she said one Friday as I prepared to meet friends for dinner. "I'm building relationships with people who share my interests and values," I replied. "What about our relationship?" I paused in putting on my jacket. "Jessica, you ended our relationship 18 months ago. You kept the marriage certificate and the shared living arrangement, but you ended the relationship. I'm simply adapting to that reality." Her face showed something I hadn't seen in years. Uncertainty. For the first time since her declaration, she seemed to realize that her decision had consequences she hadn't anticipated, and those consequences were about to become impossible to ignore. 2 years after Jessica's devastating declaration, she asked for a conversation that would change everything. "Blake, I need to talk to you about something important," she said one evening as I prepared to leave for a photography workshop. "What's on your mind?" I asked, checking my camera bag to ensure I had everything needed for the weekend session. "I've been thinking about what I said to you about ending that part of our relationship." I looked up from my equipment, genuinely curious where this was heading. "I think I made a mistake," she continued, her voice shaking slightly. "I was going through something, stress at work, feeling overwhelmed with life. I took it out on you. I never should have made that decision without discussing it." The admission was interesting, but not surprising. "What changed your mind?" I asked. She gestured helplessly at the man I'd become. "You changed. Everything about you. Your confidence, your success, your independence. I look at you now and I see someone strong and capable and attractive. So you're interested in me again because I became successful?" "No," she said quickly, then paused. "I mean, it's not just that. You became the kind of man who doesn't need anyone else to feel complete. And that's incredibly attractive." I set down my camera bag and studied her face. "Jessica, for 2 years I've lived with your rejection. I tried to understand what happened, tried to work through it, tried to save our marriage. You refused every attempt." "I know," she whispered. "I transformed myself not to win you back, but to reclaim my self-respect and build a life worth living. The fact that you're suddenly interested again proves that your original decision was about control, not genuine feelings." She was crying now. The first genuine emotion I'd seen from her since her original declaration. "Please don't give up on us. I'll do anything to make this work." Anything. The word that weak men fall for every time, but what I said next would end everything between us. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the neighborhood where I'd spent 2 years rebuilding myself from the ground up. "Jessica, you taught me something invaluable. You showed me that when someone shows you who they really are, you should believe them." "What does that mean?" she asked desperately. "It means that the night you put on lingerie just to tell me you'd never touch me again, you revealed your true character. You're someone who can withdraw love and respect when it's convenient for you, then expect it to return when circumstances change. But I realize now that I was wrong." "The problem isn't whether you were wrong," I interrupted gently. "The problem is that you demonstrated you're capable of making unilateral decisions about our relationship based on your momentary feelings. What happens the next time you're stressed or overwhelmed? Do you withdraw again?" She had no answer for that. "More importantly," I continued, "I'm no longer the kind of man who would take back someone who threw me away. You taught me that lesson, and I'm grateful for it." Her final plea was heartbreaking in its desperation. What if I had never said those words? What if I'd handled my feelings differently? I turned back to her. "Then we might have worked through it together. But you didn't choose to work with me. You chose to dismiss me. And that choice revealed something about your character that fundamentally changed how I see you." But what happened next would shock even me. Jessica's attempts to reconcile continued for several weeks. She suggested counseling, planned romantic dinners, even offered to support my photography business in ways she'd never shown interest before. But here's what she didn't understand. You can't unring that bell. The man she'd rejected 2 years ago needed her approval to feel worthy. The man I'd become didn't need anyone's approval. I'd learned to generate my own sense of worth through achievement, growth, and self-respect. One evening, as Jessica prepared another attempt at romantic reconciliation, I made a decision that felt both painful and liberating. "Jessica, I've been thinking about our conversation," I said as she lit candles around our dining room. "And?" she asked hopefully. "I think we should separate." Her face went white. "Blake, please don't do this. I know I hurt you, but people make mistakes. I'm trying to fix mine." "The mistake wasn't what you said," I replied calmly. "The mistake was when you said it. You waited until I was vulnerable and hoping for connection. And instead of working with me to improve our relationship, you delivered a devastating blow that nearly destroyed my self-worth." I walked to the window, looking out at the garden I'd maintained for 8 years of marriage. But here's the ironic part. Your rejection forced me to find my backbone. To stop being the kind of man who begs for affection and start being the kind of man who commands respect. So you're punishing me by leaving? I'm not punishing you. I'm choosing myself for the first time in our marriage. Jessica's final plea was heartbreaking in its desperation. What if I had never said those words? What if I'd handled my feelings differently? I turned back to her. Then we might have worked through it together. But you didn't choose to work with me. You chose to dismiss me. And that choice revealed something about your character that fundamentally changed how I see you. But the real shock came 3 months later. The separation was surprisingly peaceful. We divided our assets fairly, sold the house we'd shared, went our separate ways without drama or bitterness. I moved into a downtown apartment that reflected the man I'd become. Clean, organized, purposeful. My photography business continued growing. My investment portfolio flourished. My sense of self-worth was no longer dependent on anyone else's validation. 6 months after our separation, I ran into Jessica at a coffee shop. She looked tired, older somehow, like someone who'd realized too late what she'd thrown away. "How are you doing?" she asked, genuine concern in her voice. "I'm doing well," I replied honestly. "Really well." "Blake, I want you to know that I understand now what I lost. You were a good man, and I treated you terribly." The admission should have felt like vindication, but instead, I felt something like sympathy for her. "Jessica, I appreciate you saying that, but understanding what you lost isn't the same as understanding why you lost it." "What do you mean?" "You lost me because you revealed that your love was conditional. When I wasn't performing up to your standards, you withdrew it. That's not partnership. That's employment." She had no response to that truth. "But I want you to know something," I continued. "Your rejection was the best thing that ever happened to me. It forced me to become the man I was always supposed to be." "Blake," Jessica said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you 2 years ago." I waited, studying her face. "I was having an affair," she admitted, tears forming in her eyes. "Emotional, not physical, but still an affair. With my boss, Richard. I convinced myself that what I felt for him was real love, and that what we had was just comfortable." The revelation hit me like a cold wave. But strangely, it didn't hurt the way it would have 2 years ago. When I told you about ending intimacy, I was trying to push you away so I could pursue something with Richard without feeling guilty. "And how did that work out for you?" I asked, already sensing the answer. "He led me on for months," she said, her voice breaking. "Made me believe he was going to leave his wife for me. But when I finally ended things with you and gave him an ultimatum, he chose his family. Said I was just a distraction." I nodded slowly. The pieces all fell into place now. Jessica's sudden coldness, her calculated cruelty that night, her certainty about ending our marriage. She'd already redirected her heart toward another man. "After Richard ended things and you started becoming successful, I realized what I'd thrown away," she continued. "I destroyed our marriage for a fantasy that was never real." I looked at this broken woman sitting across from me, the woman who'd once held the power to devastate me with a few cruel words. Now I felt nothing but pity. "Jessica, thank you for finally telling me the truth. But you should know, discovering this doesn't change anything for me." "What do you mean?" "Whether you were having an affair or just fell out of love naturally, the result was the same. You made a unilateral decision to end our marriage without discussion, without counseling, without giving us a chance to work through whatever problems we were having." She was crying openly now. "But more importantly," I continued, "I'm no longer the kind of man who would take back someone who threw me away. You taught me that lesson, and I'm grateful for it." As I walked away from that coffee shop, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. Jessica's cruel declaration hadn't destroyed me. It had liberated me from accepting conditional love. I'd learned that when someone shows you they can arbitrarily withdraw their affection, they've shown you they'll do it again whenever it suits them. I'd learned that true transformation comes from internal motivation, not external validation. I'd learned that self-respect isn't negotiable. Most importantly, I'd learned that the best response to someone who undervalues you isn't to convince them of your worth. It's to become so valuable that their opinion becomes irrelevant. Today, my life is built on a foundation of self-respect and authentic achievement. I have work that fulfills me, relationships with people who appreciate what I bring to their lives, and most importantly, I have the unshakable knowledge that I'll never again accept being treated as disposable. Some men spend their entire lives seeking approval from people who don't value them. I was lucky enough to learn that lesson at 35, with enough time left to build something better. The man who sat devastated in his living room 2 years ago, speechless and wounded by his wife's casual cruelty, no longer exists. In his place stands someone who understands that dignity isn't something you can lose, it's something you can only give away. And I'll never make that mistake again. Gentlemen, if this story resonates with your own experience or your own journey toward self-respect, I'd appreciate you taking the time to listen, because the most important relationship you'll ever have is the one with yourself. And it's never too late to start treating yourself with the respect you deserve.